B. Collins.
Welcome to part 2 of my news and comment podcast for Thursday, January 5th, 2017. I'm Peter B. Collins. And in our second segment today, we're going to go in depth on the drama that continues to unfold in Washington, D.C. behind these hyped, if not false claims that Russia nefariously hacked the DNC, that they're responsible for the interception of John Podesta's emails, and that they handed them off to WikiLeaks, and that manipulated the outcome of our election. And as you know, I'm deeply skeptical of this, and I tie it to the kinds of psychological operations that have been conducted in the past. And as I mentioned in the first segment today, we were lied to about the drone strike that killed the younger Alaki in Yemen. And later in this segment, I'm going to tell you about new discoveries about other fabrications from the Obama administration. So this would not be the first episode of that sort. And one of the things that occurs to me is that whether he knows it or not, whether he intends it or not, Donald Trump is taking on the deep state. That's right. The CIA, the intelligence community that is seamless, doesn't really pause in between administrations. They train the next president to get him or her to fall in line. Well, no her so far. And I think that this is a confrontation that is much deeper than the corporate media is making it out to be, because the corporate media is taking the side of the intelligence communities to maintain access in the future, and because it's a way of trying to rein Trump in by smearing him as a collaborator with Putin, as a collaborator with Assange. And so the stakes here, I think, are much higher than many people realize. And with that, we saw today that the proven perjurer and a guy who's in his final days as Director of National Intelligence, General Jimmy Clapper, was up on the Hill spinning up more of that bullshit-based set of assertions. And he was set up with questions from members of both parties to slime Julian Assange and diminish his credibility. And what we're seeing here is that the Democrats are going all in backing the intelligence community. This is a serious mistake. And it is being done for short-term political reasons. Here's Claire McCaskill, Democratic senator from Missouri. She asked, who benefits from a president-elect trashing the intelligence community? Now, this intelligence community has yet to produce any proof, and today's presentations are no different. They trotted out Clapper and Mike Rogers from the NSA and the Cyber Command, and they basically teased the members about a report that is being given to President Obama today, will be briefed to Trump tomorrow, and Trump says that was delayed 3 days, but the CIA disputes that. I don't know. And then we're going to see a watered-down, declassified version of this report early next week, we're told. Now, that is news, because I thought they were just going to keep it all secret and tell us to trust them. And Clapper offered no new details. But he amplified his comments. He said, our assessment now is even more resolute that the Russians carried out the attack on the election. He confirmed there was no Russian hacking that altered the actual vote count and repeated it's not the agency's job to assess the political impact of information released by Russian agents. But he is a tool of this political operation. Now, here's something stunning as well. Mike Rogers threatened that if this rift between Trump and the intelligence community continues, that his spooks might go on strike. He cautioned. He said that the motivation to serve in American intelligence is driven in no small part by confidence from our leaders. And without that, there could be a situation where our workforce decides to walk. Now, is that a threat from the deep state? That's how I interpret it. These people are saying, you can't operate without me, and if you continue to disagree with us on the Russia angle here, We're going to screw you somewhere else by not giving you intelligence or by maybe feeding you false intelligence. And Clapper himself, tweaking Trump, said that there's an important distinction between healthy skepticism of intelligence assessments and disparagement. Well, there's a lot to disparage our intelligence community for. They've bilked the American public billions of dollars unaccounted. They operate above the law, beyond the law. They tortured people and nobody was held to account. I could go on. And once again, I'll underscore that Democrats are making a big mistake by aligning with the intelligence community in this very, very dangerous situation. Now, I mentioned BuzzFeed and that Jason Leopold is joining them. A story there today under the byline of Allie Watkins reports that to date, the FBI has never, ever asked for access to the hacked servers of the Democratic National Committee. Now, we're told they did all this investigating. Then they investigated some more. And then Obama told them to investigate, and that's the report that's coming back. That report is going to be issued or delivered after the president has already imposed sanctions based on the findings of the report that he hadn't seen, right? But let me quote here. 6 months after the FBI first said it was investigating the hack of the DNC's computer network, the Bureau has still not requested access to those servers. No U.S. government entity has run an independent forensic analysis on the system, one U.S. intelligence official told BuzzFeed News. So, the 13-page report that was released on December 29th is just more gibberish. It wasn't based on any investigation of the server that we're told was hacked by the Russians. And I want to recommend my in-depth interview that's being released today to subscribers at peterbcollins.com and all of our outlets with Trent Lipinski, a young cybersecurity analyst based here in San Francisco. And he has written extensively about this on his blog, and I'm linking to the blog in the show file for this podcast, about the skepticism that he has. And it surfaced like mine did back in October when they made these assertions about Russian intentions based on weasel words and lines like this is consistent with Russian behavior. Here's an excerpt from my fascinating conversation with Trent Lipinski.
So I immediately question the October 7th statement because, the key point of that statement is that they claimed that Russia was somehow interfering with the election process. So they're making this allegation that Russia potentially had some kind of, they were hacking the election process as if they were hacking, voting machines or something crazy like that. But that's not at all what they're inferring. I mean, the actual statement from the 7th directly implicates both DCleaks.com and WikiLeaks, as well as Guccifer 2.0. And, they were trying to create this impression that, though the evidence, showed that, they had somehow gotten, these leaks from Russia, and then the Russians were then using that to, interfere or hack the election process when no such thing took place. So going back to, the statement that was just released on December 29th, the Department of Homeland Security and FBI released this, this statement with, malware, the software essentially that is used for hacking purposes. But the actual malware in question is extremely unsophisticated. Julian Assange said it perfectly the other night on his Sean Hannity interview. This is something that a 14-year-old can download and send to anybody. This is publicly available software. To make matters even, more unusual, the software is actually an outdated version. So they're warning, this statement is basically warning the InfoSec community about outdated software that's publicly available that originated from a hacking group in the Ukraine. So again, not necessarily Russian. So then what's even more bizarre is they released, this list of IP addresses. So an IP address is, the address that, computers use to communicate on the internet. The problem is an IP address is not proof of identity. There are tactics that can be used to fake IP addresses. You can reroute IP addresses. You can spoof IP addresses. They're not proof that, the person at this address, is physically at this location and has this identity and is, Trent Lipinski.
And
that's
Trent,
not how they work.
Let me just add, you're more sophisticated than I am, but I know enough to know that there are many useful purposes for generating an IP address that are not nefarious. And for example,
Correct.
I have a piece of software that generates IP addresses so that people can connect up with me over the internet to receive radio programs. And we do it for stability and predictability, not to pretend that I'm actually in Okinawa.
Correct.
There's a lot more in my in-depth interview with Trent Lipinski, and I invite you to listen to the entire package. One of the things we talked about is the effort by the corporate media to smear Julian Assange, following up on President Obama's last news conference where he said, gosh, who are you going to believe? Julian Assange, the Russians, or our own intelligence community? And this false choice is being presented as a way to strengthen the consensus position about Russia hacking that is all based on speculation. And I'm particularly sad to see that Scott Shane, a reporter for the New York Times, whom I respect, published a piece today that has a lot of speculation being passed off as fact. The headline reads, Trump and Julian Assange, an unlikely pair, unite to sow hacking doubts. Now, there's no unity between Trump and Assange. They happen to agree, and they have publicly, embraced each other's point of view. But Trump himself today was tweeting, hey, I'm a big fan of the intelligence community, and the media is lying when it says that, essentially I have joined forces with Julian Assange. But let me quote from Scott Shane's piece here. It is highly unlikely that anyone approaching WikiLeaks with the emails obtained by the Russian government hacking would acknowledge the source. So he treats as fact the Russian government hacking and then speculates from there and says that it appears that Assange can't be sure of the ultimate origin of the emails. But that may be true. Still, the CIA has offered us no evidence. No intelligence agency has. And so we're just pissing all over Julian Assange when you can ask the very same questions of the agencies that have made these assertions that are now represented as being 100% fact. So it's really troubling to see the corporate media circle its wagons to support Obama, the Democrats, the intelligence community, when they should be impartial. And they should be reporting both sides of this even-handedly and letting readers and viewers decide for themselves. Here's another attack. Though the celebrity businessman and the champion of leakers are both showmen, sometimes derided by critics as narcissists, they might seem to have little else in common. So look at the way those smears were inserted here. Now, I think it's fair, independently, to call both Trump and Assange narcissists. But to then suggest that that is why they are in this alleged collusion around all this is just pure speculation. Here's some more. There are many reasons to accept the idea that Russian intelligence was behind the hacks and leaks that affected the election. Even if the public case is not yet airtight, experts say. Who are the fucking experts? Well, they cite a couple of people from these private security firms. Then they have government officials who say, yeah, the private security firms have it right. But those private security firms have no evidence about this alleged hack. They simply believe it. Here's another quote. Sleuths across the intelligence agencies believe Russia's military intelligence agency is behind the group blamed for the email hacking. Their views are presumably based not just on analyzing the malware and other features of the hacks, but on spy work. Presumably, right? Presumably. This is supposed to be fact-based, and it's not. So over at the Washington Post, as if this is tag team smear day for Julian Assange, they put out their fact-checker, Michelle Yeehee Lee, and she goes to bat against Julian Assange because of a comment made by Sean Hannity in their Fox News interview that Assange agreed with. So Hannity said, "Can you say to the American people unequivocally that you did not get this information about the DNC, John Podesta's emails? Can you tell the American people 1,000% you did not get it from Russia?" "Yes," says Assange. Hannity, "Or anybody associated with Russia?" Assange, We can say, and we have said repeatedly over the last 2 months, that our source is not the Russian government and it is not a state party." Now, Hannity brought in the 1,000%. And Assange fell for it. He said yes. Nobody can prove with 100% accuracy, much less 1,000%, that any of these things are true. There's just too much that is unknown. But the fact checker at the Washington Post tries to drive a Mack truck through that little hole with this. His answer leaves open the possibility that the information could have come through an intermediary. Well, there are many possibilities here. But the U.S. has made flat assertions that Russia hacked, gave it to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks published it. And that has not been proven, and the Washington Post does a recitation of what they call the facts, which simply recites the series of anonymous, unidentified leaks from high-ranking intelligence officials. And again, this whole cycle ends up taking speculation and treating it as fact. And this is not anything that I consider to be journalism or responsible news reporting. And we're in the middle of a maelstrom here. When it's all over, we'll be able to see it much more clearly. Now, one of the things that Trent Lipinski mentions in the in-depth interview today is that he saw a CNN report where one of their so-called national security experts, a guy named Phil Mudd, was there, and he was smearing WikiLeaks and promoting the Russia hack meme. And then he said this. He suggested that Assange didn't want to taint his operation before astonishingly labeling him as a pedophile who lives in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Now, this has resulted in a threat from WikiLeaks to sue CNN and presumably Phil Mudd for a false statement. There is no indication, there's been no allegation that I've seen of pedophile behavior by Julian Assange, and this is just an additional way of trying to take him down and get us to ignore that WikiLeaks facilitated the release of actual viable information that voters deserve to know about. Trump has been talking about cutting back or eliminating the Director of National Intelligence Department, and I actually think that might be a good idea. But nonetheless, he has. It's been leaked today that he's going to name former Indiana Republican Senator Dan Coats as the Director of National Intelligence. As you may know, I'm conducting a book clearance. The goal is to try to get a car into our garage, and so I have culled hundreds of books that I've been collecting for years. And I've selected a few juicy ones to make available to you if you can help generate some revenue for the Peter B. Collins podcast. So today I'm going to add a book by Madeleine Albright, Bill Clinton's Secretary of State and UN ambassador. And this is a book that's personal about her. She discovered that she was Jewish late in life and that she had quite an interesting history, and she wrote a book called Prague Winter about that. I have a signed copy to Peter B. Best Wishes, Madeleine Albright, and I'll be happy to make this available to the first person who claims it with a $100 or more contribution to the Peter B. Collins podcast. I'm still looking for a taker for the Alan Dershowitz signed copy of Chutzpah and the 2-pack of Patty Davis books. Patty Davis, the daughter of Ronald and Nancy Reagan, her memoir called The Way I See It, and her novel called Bondage, with the inscription about the handcuffs that I bought her to wear during the interview. So email Peter at peterbcollins.com if you'd like to pick up any of these books. You'll help me clear out my garage and generate some much-needed revenue here at the Peter B. Collins podcast. And finally, One other item that was mentioned in my conversation with Trent Lipinski is the history of false claims coming out of the Obama administration. And a lot of people, point to Bush and the selling of the war in Iraq back in 2002, 2003. But since then, we've seen false claims of the, claim that it was the Assad government responsible for unleashing a chemical weapon in Syria in 2014. We saw the government of the United States falsely claim that it knew that Russia was responsible for the downing of MH17 over Ukraine. And now, thanks to Dan Wright at Shadowproof, we know that the item that surfaced in the summer of 2014, that the U.S. had to be really afraid because the Khorasan group had surfaced in Syria. And we scratched our heads and said, where did this come from? And we all assumed that it was just dreamed up by a CIA person at Langley. Well, now we know that's kind of true. Dan Wright's report indicates that the Khorasan group was not new, as officials had told us, but was essentially a group of people already part of al-Qaeda. And this was a very misleading report that was used to try to strengthen American resolve and public opinion in support of misguided military action in Syria. That's all I have time for today. Thanks for joining me for my News and Comment podcast, Part 1 and Part 2. It's available every day on YouTube and all my other outlets. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.